She'd been digging into Charles and Melissa's business dealings for the past week. And what she'd uncovered was like finding out your favorite restaurant has been serving roadkill and calling it prime rib. Let's start with the obvious stuff, Sophia said, pulling up bank statements on her screen. Charles has been funneling Harrison Tech resources into something called Green Innovations LLC. Want to guess who the primary shareholder is? I didn't need to guess. The sick feeling in my stomach told me everything I needed to know, Melissa. Victor said, leaning forward with the kind of interest a shark shows when it smells blood. Bingo. But here's where it gets really interesting. Sophia's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up incorporation documents that looked official enough to fool most people. Green Innovations was supposedly created to develop cutting-edge logistics software. Sound familiar? It sounded familiar because it was my software. The logistics AI I'd spent 3 years developing. The same technology that Julian Cross had just paid $25 million for was apparently being claimed by my soon-to-be ex-wife shell company. Those bastards, I muttered, feeling that familiar rage building in my chest like steam in a pressure cooker. Oh, we're just getting started, Sophia said, clearly enjoying herself. Victor, remember when you asked about questionable business decisions? Well, Charles has been playing fast and loose with Harrison Tech's intellectual property agreements. According to these documents, any technology developed by employees using company resources technically belongs to the company. Except Adrian developed his AI on his own time, using his own equipment. Victor said his lawyer brain already 3 steps ahead. Exactly. But Charles filed paperwork claiming it was developed during work hours using company computers. Problem is, Adrian's got timestamped personal files going back 2 years that prove otherwise. I pulled out my phone and showed them the backup files I've been keeping on my personal cloud storage. Every iteration, every breakthrough, every late-night coding session, all documented and dated, all clearly showing that I'd been working on this project at home on weekends during my own time. Beautiful, Victor said, his smile getting wider. That's fraud, conspiracy, and theft of intellectual property. But please tell me there's more. Sophia's grin could have powered half of Denver. Oh, there's so much more. Remember how Melissa always seemed to know exactly what was happening at Harrison Tech even before I did? Well, it turns out Charles has been giving her access to confidential company information, including employee files, financial reports, and development timelines. She pulled up email chains that made my blood boil. Messages between Charles and Melissa discussing my work, my progress, my setbacks, all of it shared like I was some kind of science experiment they were monitoring. Look at this one, Sophia said, highlighting an email from 3 months ago. Charles to Melissa. Adrian's getting close to finishing the AI. We need to accelerate our timeline. The patent filing should be ready by next week. Patent filing. They've been planning to steal my work and patent it under Green Innovations, cutting me out completely. The betrayal was so complete, so thoroughly planned that it took my breath away. And this one, Sophia continued, pulling up another email. Melissa to Charles, he'll never bounce back from this. Once we have the technology and he's out of the picture, we can move forward without any complications. There it was in black and white. Proof that they'd been conspiring against me for months, maybe longer. This wasn't some spontaneous affair that had gotten out of hand. This was a calculated plan to destroy my life and steal my work. Victor was taking notes furiously, his pen scratching across legal pads like he was composing a symphony of litigation. This is good. This is very good, but I need more financial records, communication logs, anything that shows a pattern of deception. Way ahead of you, Sophia said, pulling up what looked like months of detailed financial records. I've been tracking their spending patterns, and Charles has been using Harrison Tech corporate credit cards for personal expenses, dinners with Melissa, hotel rooms, jewelry, including that diamond necklace she was wearing at the party. Company theft, Victor noted, adding it to his growing list. But wait, there's more, Sophia said, doing her best in commercial impression. Charles has also been falsifying expense reports, claiming business trips that were actually romantic getaways with Melissa. The Napa Valley conference that never existed, the Austin Tech Summit, that was really a spa weekend, all of it paid for by Harrison Tech shareholders. I was starting to feel dizzy from the sheer scope of their deception. How long has this been going on based on these records? At least 18 months. Probably longer. Sophia's expression softened slightly. Adrian, I'm sorry. I know this is hard to hear, but they've been planning this for a long time. 18 months. While I've been working myself into the ground, staying late at the office, missing dinners and weekends because I thought I was building something for our future. They'd been systematically planning my downfall. There's something else, Sophia said quietly. I found the original timeline for when they planned to fire you. It was supposed to happen right after the Meatfair meeting after they'd secured the licensing deal using your technology. What changed? Victor asked. Adrian beat them to it. When he signed directly with Julian Cross, it screwed up their entire plan. That's why Charles seemed so rattled at the party. He wasn't just losing Adrian's technology. He was losing months of careful planning. Victor leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers like a movie villain who just figured out the perfect scheme. Gentlemen and lady, what we have here isn't just adultery and corporate theft. This is a full-scale conspiracy involving fraud, embezzlement, and intellectual property theft. We're not just going to win this case, we're going to obliterate them. What's our next move? I asked, feeling something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Not the naive kind that believes everything will work out fine, but the cold, calculating kind that comes with having evidence and allies. We file everything. Criminal charges, civil suits, ethics complaints with the state bar, the full nuclear option. Victor's smile was absolutely predatory. Charles Mercer and Melissa Greenblake are about to learn what happens when you steal from the wrong person. Sophia closed her laptop with a satisfying snap. They thought they were playing chess while you were playing checkers, Adrian. Turns out we were all playing poker and we just showed them our royal flush. As I walked out of Victor's office that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced since walking in on Melissa and Charles' power. These people had underestimated me, treated me like a disposable pawn in their little game of greed and betrayal. Now it was time to show them exactly how wrong they'd been. You know that feeling when you're about to drop a nuclear bomb on someone's life and you're practically vibrating with anticipation? Yeah. Well, that was me on Thursday morning sitting in my crappy rental apartment watching the clock tick toward 10 a.m. like it was New Year's Eve countdown. Today was D-Day. Operation Around and Find Out was officially going live and Charles Mercer and Melissa Greenblake were about to discover that karma doesn't just come back around. Sometimes it shows up with a team of lawyers and a truckload of evidence. Victor had spent the past week crafting what he called a legal masterpiece, filing papers with the Denver District Court that read like a greatest hits collection of corporate fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, conspiracy, embezzlement, theft of intellectual property, and about 12 other charges that would make a mob lawyer proud. The man had basically written Charles and Melissa's professional obituaries in legal terminology. But here's the beautiful part. They had no idea it was coming. Victor had timed everything perfectly, making sure the papers would be served at maximum humiliation potential. And trust me, when you're dealing with people whose entire existence revolves around maintaining their public image, timing is everything. My phone buzzed at exactly 10:15 a.m. text message from Sophia. The Eagle has landed. Repeat, the Eagle has landed. Our process server, a guy named Tony, who looked like he could bench press a small car, had just delivered the lawsuit papers to Charles and Melissa at the Ritz-Carlton downtown, where they were having what the society pages had called an intimate engagement brunch with close friends and family. Intimate, right? Because nothing says intimate like inviting 24 of Denver's biggest gossip to watch you celebrate destroying someone's marriage. Sophia had done her homework as usual. She'd found out about the brunch from Melissa's Instagram story because of course Melissa was documenting every second of her fairy tale romance for social media validation. The woman had posted pictures of the fancy table settings, the mimosas that probably cost more than most people's grocery bills, and a selfie with Charles that was captioned, "Living my best life with my best man." Yeah, well, your best life was about to get a reality check served with a side of federal charges. My phone rang 20 minutes later. Victor's voice was practically purring with satisfaction. Adrian, I have to say, 30 years of practicing law, and I've never heard screaming quite like that. Screaming? Oh, yes. Apparently, Patricia Green's reaction to seeing the lawsuit papers was audible. From the lobby, 3 floors down. I couldn't help but laugh. Patricia Green, the woman who treated volume control like a personal weakness, had finally found something worth shrieking about. That wasn't the hired help using the wrong crystal glasses. What about Charles and Melissa? According to Tony, Charles went white as a sheet and started hyperventilating. Melissa threw her mimosa at the process server, missed him completely, and hit Harold instead. The mental image of Harold Green dripping with expensive champagne and orange juice while his daughter had a public meltdown was so satisfying, I almost felt guilty about enjoying it. Almost. The best part, Victor continued, is that about half of Denver's social elite witnessed the whole thing. Tony said the place went dead silent, then erupted in whispers. I'm betting the story's already making the rounds at every country club in the city. That was the thing about rich people. They loved drama almost as much as they loved money, especially when it involved watching someone else's carefully constructed life implode in spectacular fashion. By dinner time, Every socialite in Denver would know that Charles Mercer and Melissa Greenblake were facing serious federal charges. How long before they call? I asked. Oh, Charles has already tried 3 times. My secretary told him I was in court all day. Victor's laugh was pure evil genius. Let them sweat. Desperation makes people stupid and stupid people make mistakes. The next call came from Sophia an hour later. Adrian, you need to see this. Melissa's having a complete meltdown on social media. I pulled up her Instagram account and holy, it was like watching a train derail in real time. The woman who usually posted carefully curated images of her perfect life was now firing off story after story of barely coherent rage. This is harassment. One story read, posted over a picture of what looked like legal documents scattered across a restaurant table. My lawyers will destroy whoever is behind this. Another story showed her crying in what appeared to be the back of an Uber, mascara streaming down her face like black tears. Some people can't handle success and will do anything to tear you down. But my personal favorite was the one where she was clearly drunk, filmed from an unflattering angle in what looked like the Green family wine cellar, slurring into her phone. Adrian Blake is a pathetic loser who can't accept that I upgraded. Charles is twice the man he'll ever be. She's spiraling, Sophia said when I called her back. This is beautiful. She's basically creating evidence for us in real time. What do you mean? Defamation, Adrian. Every one of these posts is another charge we can add to the pile. And the drunk one that's going to play real well in front of a jury. The afternoon brought even better news. Julian Cross called personally to let me know that Harrison Tech had reached out to Metasphere trying to salvage some kind of partnership deal. They're in full panic mode, Julian said, his voice carrying that amused tone of someone watching idiots dig their own graves. Charles called my office 4 times today, demanding to speak with me about damage control. My assistant told him I was unavailable indefinitely. What did they offer? Everything. Exclusive licensing rights, reduced rates, even offered to make Charles a consultant on the project. Julian laughed. The desperation was almost embarrassing to witness. What did you tell them? I told them that Metasphere Corporation doesn't do business with companies under federal investigation. Seemed like sound business practice. That evening, Harold Green called me directly. The man who dismissed me as worthless pawn scum just days earlier was now speaking in the kind of hushed, desperate tones usually reserved for hostage negotiations. Adrian, he said, his voice shaking slightly. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Surely we can work this out like civilized people. Civilized people, I repeated, savoring the irony. You mean like how civilized you were when you told me I deserved what happened, or when you said I wasn't good enough for your daughter? Now see here. No, Harold. You see here, your daughter and her boyfriend committed multiple felonies. They stole my intellectual property, defrauded their employer, and conspired to destroy my career. The only misunderstanding here is that you thought I'd just roll over and take it. This will destroy Melissa's reputation. Melissa destroyed her own reputation when she decided to screw my boss in my bed. I'm just making sure everyone knows about it. I hung up on him mid-sentence, which felt almost as good as signing that $25 million contract. The final call of the day came from Charles himself. He was trying to sound confident, but I could hear the panic underneath his words like a car engine about to seize up. Adrian, this is ridiculous. We both know this is just about your hurt feelings over Melissa. Drop the lawsuit and we can discuss a reasonable settlement. Settlement? I laughed so hard I almost choked. Charles, you're facing 5 to 10 years in federal prison. What exactly do you think you have to negotiate with? You're bluffing. You don't have any real evidence. Bank records, email chains, falsified expense reports, stolen intellectual property documentation, and about 3 dozen witnesses to your various crimes. But sure, I'm totally bluffing. The silence, on the other end, was so complete, I thought he'd hung up. Charles, you still there, buddy? This isn't over, he finally managed, his voice cracking like a 13-year-old trying to sound tough. You're absolutely right, I said. It's not over. It's just getting started. As I hung up and looked around my shitty little apartment, I realized something had fundamentally changed. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the guy with the evidence, the allies, and the $25 million contract. And tomorrow, the real fun would begin. You know that moment in every courtroom drama where the music swells and justice gets served with a side of dramatic irony? Well, real life doesn't come with a soundtrack. But let me tell you, the silence in Judge Eleanor Gay's courtroom was more electric than any Hollywood score could ever be. 6 weeks after serving those beautiful lawsuit papers, we were finally here. Showtime. The Denver District Court was packed tighter than a rush-hour subway car because apparently watching rich people get their comeuppance was better entertainment than anything Netflix had to offer. The press section looked like a media convention, and I counted at least 3 cameras I recognized from the local news stations. Judge Grace was exactly what you'd want in a federal judge. Sharp as a razor, zero tolerance for and the kind of stare that could make a seasoned criminal confess to crimes they didn't even commit. She'd been on the bench for 20 years, and rumor had it she'd never met a white-collar criminal she couldn't see through like cheap plastic wrap. Charles and Melissa sat at the defendant's table looking like they dressed for their own funeral. Charles was wearing what was probably a $5,000 suit, but he looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His usual smug confidence had been replaced by the kind of nervous energy you see in people who've just realized they're completely screwed. Melissa had gone for the innocent victim look, all white clothing and minimal makeup. But she kept shooting daggers at me like this was somehow my fault instead of the natural consequence of her being a lying, cheating, thieving piece of work. Their legal team looked expensive and desperate, which is never a good combination. 3 lawyers in matching suits, all trying to look confident while clearly knowing they'd drawn the legal equivalent of a busted flush. The lead attorney, some hotshot from a firm that charged more per hour than most people made in a month, kept shuffling through papers like he was looking for a miracle hidden in the paperwork. Victor, on the other hand, looked like a man who'd been waiting his entire career for this moment. He'd laid out our evidence with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Every document organized, every witness prepared, every piece of the puzzle ready to fall into place. Sophia sat behind us in the gallery, her laptop open and ready to provide technical support if needed, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. Your Honor, Victor began, standing with the kind of confidence that comes from having an airtight case. What we have before us today isn't just a simple case of corporate fraud. This is a calculated conspiracy that spans 18 months involving theft of intellectual property, embezzlement of corporate funds, and a systematic campaign to destroy my client's career and reputation. He walked toward the jury box like he was giving a TED Talk, holding up the first piece of evidence, the original contract I'd signed with Julian Cross. Ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at a $25 million contract for technology that the defendants attempted to steal. Not borrow, not license, not purchase, steal. The jury was eating it up. 12 regular folks who worked real jobs for real money, watching rich people try to explain why they thought they could just take whatever they wanted. The foreman, a guy who looked like he'd spent his life working with his hands, was taking notes like he was planning to write a book about it. Charles's lawyer stood up for his opening statement, and you could tell he was already fighting an uphill battle. Your Honor, my clients are the victims of a vindictive ex-husband who can't accept that his marriage has ended. Mr. Blake is using the legal system to exact personal revenge. Objection, Victor said calmly. Is counsel planning to address the documented evidence of embezzlement, or are we going to pretend this is about hurt feelings? Sustained. Judge Graves said dryly. Counsel will stick to the facts. And boy, did we have facts. Victor presented our case like he was conducting a symphony orchestra. Each piece of evidence building on the last until the whole picture became undeniable. Bank statements showing Charles funneling company money into Melissa's shell corporation. Email chains proving they'd been planning to steal my technology for months. Expense reports that showed Charles billing Harrison Tech for romantic getaways with his mistress. The real fireworks started when Victor called Julian Cross to the stand. The man walked into that courtroom like he owned it, which given his net worth, he probably could have. His testimony was devastating in its simplicity. Mr. Cross, Victor said, in your professional opinion, what is the value of Mr. Blake's logistics AI technology? Conservative estimate? $50 million over the next 5 years. But the real value is in the potential applications. This technology could revolutionize supply chain management across multiple industries. And did Harrison Tech or any of its representatives ever contact you about licensing this technology? Julian's smile was absolutely predatory multiple times. In fact, Mr. Mercer called my office 17 times in the 2 weeks following our contract signing with Mr. Blake. He seemed quite desperate. Charles actually flinched when Julian said that. And I saw one of the jurors write something down with particular emphasis. But the real show started when Melissa took the stand. She'd clearly been coached by her lawyers to appear remorseful and sympathetic, but Melissa had never been good at hiding her true nature for very long. Victor started with softball questions, letting her tell her side of the story. She painted herself as a woman trapped in a loveless marriage, seeking comfort with a man who understood her needs. Real tragic stuff. If you ignored the part where she'd been systematically stealing my life's work. Mrs. Greenblake, Victor said, his tone shifting subtly. You testified that your relationship with Mr. Mercer began because you felt neglected by your husband. Is that correct? Yes, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Adrienne was always working, always focused on his computers. Charles made me feel valued. I see. And when did you first learn about your husband's logistics AI project? I am not sure I understand the question. Victor pulled out a printed email and handed it to her. This is an email you sent to Mr. Mercer 14 months ago. Would you mind reading the highlighted portion to the jury? Melissa's face went white as she read the email. This is taken out of context. Please read it aloud, Mrs. Green-Blake. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Adrienne's AI project is progressing faster than expected. We need to accelerate our timeline for the patent filing. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Even Charles's expensive lawyers couldn't hide their grimaces. Mrs. Green-Blake, Victor continued, his voice getting sharper. This email is dated 6 months before you claim your affair with Mr. Mercer began. How do you explain discussing patent filings for your husband's work before you even started your relationship with the man who would supposedly file those patents? It's not what it looks like. What it looks like, Mrs. Green-Blake, is a conspiracy. What it looks like is that you and Mr. Mercer planned this entire scheme from the beginning. What it looks like is that your marriage was nothing more than industrial espionage disguised as a relationship. Melissa completely lost it. All that coaching, all that preparation, all those expensive lawyers, and she reverted to type right there in front of God, the jury, and 3 news cameras. You don't understand, she screamed, jumping up from the witness chair. Adrienne was nothing. He was a nobody working in a cubicle going nowhere. Charles offered me a real future, real success. I deserved better than some loser who couldn't even afford to take me to decent restaurants. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, staring at Melissa like she'd just confessed to murder on live television. Judge Graves banged her gavel once, the sound echoing through the courtroom like a gunshot. Mrs. Green-Blake, you will sit down and compose yourself or you will be held in contempt. But the damage was done. Melissa had just admitted in front of a jury and multiple cameras that she'd married me under false pretenses and conspired with Charles to steal my work because she thought I wasn't good enough for her. Victor turned to the jury with a look of satisfied vindication. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think I need to add anything to that testimony. When they played the audio recording that Sophia had somehow obtained, Melissa and Charles at some cafe, laughing about how they'd crushed me and how I'd never bounce back. I watched the jury's faces turn to stone. The defense tried to recover, but you can't unring a bell, and Melissa had just rung the Liberty Bell at full volume. Charles took the stand and tried to paint himself as a businessman making tough decisions. But after his accomplice had basically confessed to conspiracy on camera, his testimony sounded like a man trying to explain why water isn't wet. As closing arguments wrapped up, I looked around that courtroom and realized something fundamental had changed. I wasn't the broken, humiliated husband anymore. I was the guy who'd fought back, who'd refused to be a victim, who'd turned the tables on people who thought they were untouchable. The jury deliberated for exactly 47 minutes, not even long enough to order lunch. When they came back, the foreman stood up with the kind of grim satisfaction that meant someone was about to get exactly what they deserved. In the matter of Blake versus Mercer and Green-Blake, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. We find for the plaintiff on all counts. You know that moment when the universe finally decides to balance the scales and you get to watch karma deliver a beatdown so epic it should come with its own highlight reel? Yeah. Well, that was me sitting in Judge Graves' courtroom watching 47 minutes of jury deliberation turn into the most satisfying I told you so moment of my entire life. The foreman was still standing holding that verdict sheet like it contained the meaning of life itself. And the silence in the courtroom was so complete, you could have heard a pin drop in the parking lot. Charles looked like he was about to throw up. Melissa was gripping the defendant's table so hard her knuckles had gone white. And even their expensive legal team was staring at the floor like they were contemplating career changes. Judge Graves adjusted her reading glasses with the kind of deliberate precision that meant she was about to deliver some serious judicial justice. Will the defendants please rise for sentencing? Charles and Melissa stood up like they were walking to their own execution, which in a way they were. Their lawyer tried to whisper something to them, but Judge Graves shut that down with a look that could have frozen hell over. Mr. Mercer, she began, her voice carrying the weight of 20 years on the bench. You have been found guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement of corporate funds, theft of intellectual property, and breach of fiduciary duty. These are serious crimes that strike at the heart of business ethics and personal integrity. She paused, letting that sink in while Charles swayed slightly like he might pass out. You held a position of trust and responsibility, and you used that position to systematically defraud your employer and destroy an employee's career for personal gain. This court sentences you to 5 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. 5 years. The number hit Charles like a physical blow, and I watched his knees buckle slightly. His lawyer grabbed his arm to keep him upright, but you could see the exact moment when the reality of federal prison really sank in. This wasn't some country club minimum security facility. This was real time in a real prison with real consequences. Furthermore, Judge Grace continued, you are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $250,000 to Harrison Tech for the misappropriated funds and an additional $500,000 in punitive damages to Mr. Blake. The press section erupted in whispers, and I saw at least 3 reporters frantically typing on their phones. $750,000 on top of 5 years in prison. Charles had gone from corporate executive to bankrupt felon in the span of about 30 seconds. But Judge Graves wasn't done. She turned her attention to Melissa, and if looks could kill, my soon-to-be ex-wife would have been a smoking crater in the courtroom floor. Mrs. Green Blake, she said, her voice getting colder. Your role in this conspiracy is particularly disturbing. You used the intimacy of marriage to spy on your husband, steal his intellectual property, and facilitated theft by your co-conspirator. You violated the most basic trust that exists between spouses for financial gain. Melissa was crying now, but they weren't the crocodile tears she'd been using during the trial. These were the real thing, the kind of crying that comes from watching your entire life collapse in real time. This court sentences you to 2 years in federal prison followed by 2 years of supervised probation. You are further ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $500,000 to Mr. Blake for damages related to the theft of intellectual property and emotional distress. 2 years in prison and $500,000. The woman who told me I wasn't good enough for her, who'd laughed about crushing me and how I'd never bounce back, was now facing federal prison time and financial ruin. Additionally, Judge Graves continued, both defendants are permanently enjoined from any involvement in technology development or intellectual property licensing. You are barred from working in any capacity that involves proprietary information or trade secrets. That was the real kicker. Charles and Melissa weren't just going to prison. They were being permanently banned from the only industries they knew. Charles's career in tech was over, and Melissa's dreams of building some startup empire with stolen technology had just evaporated like morning mist. But the judge wasn't finished. She turned her attention to Harold and Patricia Green, who'd been sitting in the gallery looking like they'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Mr. and Mrs. Green, she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. While you are not criminal defendants in this case, the evidence clearly shows that you enabled and financially supported this conspiracy. You are hereby ordered to pay civil damages in the amount of $100,000 for your role in facilitating these crimes. Harold actually gasped, and Patricia looked like she might faint. $100,000 might not sound like much to people who own mansions and collected first edition books, but it was the public humiliation that really stung. Their name, their precious family reputation, was now permanently associated with federal crimes and conspiracy. The courtroom erupted as Judge Graves banged her gavel and announced that court was adjourned. Reporters swarmed toward the front of the room. Cameras flashed like strobe lights and the whole place turned into controlled chaos. I watched Charles and Melissa being led away by federal marshals, their hands cuffed behind their backs like common criminals. Charles kept looking back over his shoulder, his eyes wide with panic and disbelief. This was a man who'd probably never faced real consequences for anything in his entire privileged life. And now he was heading to federal prison. Melissa was sobbing so hard she could barely walk, leaning heavily on the marshal like her legs might give out. The woman who'd worn that diamond necklace like a trophy, who'd flaunted her affair in front of half of Denver's elite, was now wearing federal handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit in her immediate future. Victor was practically glowing with satisfaction, shaking hands with Sophia and accepting congratulations from other lawyers who'd come to watch the show. Adrian, he said, turning to me with that predatory smile. I've been practicing law for 30 years, and I've never seen a more complete victory. They didn't just lose, they were annihilated. The press conference afterward was surreal. Standing on the courthouse steps, facing a wall of cameras and microphones, I felt like I was in some kind of alternate reality where the good guy actually wins and justice isn't just a theoretical concept. Mr. Blake. One reporter called out, how does it feel to see your wife and former boss sentenced to federal prison? Former wife? I corrected, savoring the words. The divorce papers were filed this morning. And honestly, it feels like justice. These people thought they could destroy my life and steal my work because they believed I was too weak to fight back. Today proved them wrong. What's next for you? Another reporter asked. I looked up at the Denver skyline, thinking about the loft apartment. I just signed a lease for the team I was building. The future I was creating on my own terms. I'm going to do what I've always done. Innovate, create, and build something meaningful. The only difference is that now I'm doing it without people who tried to sabotage me every step of the way. That evening, I sat in my new downtown loft, looking out at the city lights and thinking about how dramatically my life had changed. 6 months ago, I'd been married to a woman who was actively conspiring against me, working for a boss who was stealing my ideas and living a lie that I was too naive to recognize. Now I was free, vindicated, and richer than I'd ever imagined possible. But more importantly, I was surrounded by people who actually gave a damn about me. Sophia, Victor, Julian, and a growing team of brilliant minds who saw potential instead of weakness. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Drinks to celebrate? I think you've earned it." As I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, I realized that this wasn't just the end of my old life. It was the beginning of something infinitely better. Charles and Melissa had tried to break me. But all they'd done was forge me into something stronger. And tomorrow, the real work would begin. You know what freedom actually smells like? It smells like fresh paint, new leather office chairs, and the kind of expensive coffee that you buy because you can, not because you're trying to impress anyone. That's what hit me as I walked into my new downtown loft on a crisp Monday morning, 6 months after watching Charles and Melissa get hauled away in federal handcuffs. The place was a far cry from that shitty rental apartment where I'd eaten my weight in Chinese takeout and contemplated the ruins of my life. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Denver skyline. Hardwood floors that actually gleamed instead of peeling, and enough space to host a small army of brilliant minds who were about to help me change the world. Blake Innovations had officially launched 3 weeks ago, and we were already making waves in the tech industry that rippled all the way to Silicon Valley. Sophia was my co-founder and CTO because, let's face it, the woman could debug code and destroy enemies with equal efficiency. Victor had agreed to serve as our general counsel, mostly because he enjoyed the idea of protecting the company that had risen from the ashes of Charles Mercer's stupidity. And Julian Cross wasn't just a business partner anymore. He'd become a strategic advisor whose Rolodex opened doors I didn't even know existed. But here's the thing that really got me fired up. We weren't just building a company. We were building a middle finger to everyone who'd ever been betrayed by the people they trusted most. The Phoenix Initiative launched on a Tuesday that felt like Christmas morning, and the 4th of July rolled into one epic celebration of corporate betrayal. It was a venture fund specifically designed to help innovators who'd been screwed over by their families, employers, or business partners. We'd started with a modest $10 million fund, but after word got out about what we were doing, the applications started pouring in like water through a broken dam. There was Marcus Rodriguez, a software engineer whose brother had stolen his mobile app idea and sold it to a major tech company. Sarah Chun, a biotech researcher whose lab partner had published her work under his name and landed a 6-figure consulting deal. David Thompson, a mechanical engineer whose father-in-law had used family connections to patent his renewable energy design and cut him out completely. Each story was a variation on the same theme. Brilliant people getting screwed by the people closest to them, then being told they should just let it go and move on with their lives. Well, that noise. Moving on was for people who accepted defeat. We were in the business of fighting back. The launch event was held at the Denver Art Museum because nothing says we've arrived like hosting your corporate debut in a building that looks like it was designed by aliens with excellent taste. The guest list read like a who's who of Colorado's tech and business elite. Plus a healthy sprinkling of journalists who'd been following my story since the courtroom circus. I stood at the podium looking out at an audience of 500 people who 6 months ago would have dismissed me as a pathetic cuckold living in denial. Now they were hanging on every word, taking notes, and probably calculating how much money they could make by associating with the guy who turned personal betrayal into a multi-million-dollar empire. Ladies and gentlemen, I began my voice carrying easily through the museum's sound system. 6 months ago, I was fired from my job, betrayed by my wife, and told by her family that I wasn't good enough to breathe the same air as their precious daughter. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. These people loved a good redemption story, especially when it involved rich getting their comeuppance. Today, those same people are in federal prison, bankrupt, and permanently banned from the industries they tried to steal from me. But this isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about what happens when you refuse to accept other people's definitions of your worth. I clicked to the first slide, showing the Phoenix Initiative logo against a backdrop of rising flames. The Phoenix Initiative exists because betrayal isn't a character flaw in the victim. It's a business opportunity for the survivor. We're not here to help people get over being screwed. We're here to help them turn that betrayal into fuel for something bigger, better, and infinitely more successful than whatever they lost. The applause was immediate and sustained. But I wasn't done yet. Our first round of funding goes to 12 innovators who've been told to sit down, shut up, and accept that life isn't fair. Instead, they're going to stand up, speak out, and build empires that make their betrayers regret ever crossing them. The energy in the room was electric. I could see people already networking, making connections, plotting their own Phoenix moments. This wasn't just a business launch. It was a movement. After the formal presentation, I found myself surrounded by a crowd of entrepreneurs, investors, and journalists who wanted to know everything about our screening process, our success metrics, and our long-term vision. But the conversation that really mattered happened near the bar, where a young woman approached me with the kind of desperate hope I recognized from my own mirror 6 months ago. "Mr. Blake," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "My name is Jennifer Walsh. My business partner stole my AI algorithm and my client list, then had me blacklisted from every tech company in Austin. I've been fighting him in court for 2 years, but he's got family money and connections." I handed her my business card. "Jennifer, send me everything. Patents, court documents, financial records, email chains, all of it. We'll have our team review your case within 48 hours. Her eyes filled with tears. "You'd really do that even though you don't know me? I know exactly who you are." I said, "You're someone who got betrayed by a person you trusted, and now you're being told to accept it and move on. That. You're going to fight back and we're going to help you win." That's when Sophia appeared at my elbow, grinning like she'd just solved cold fusion. "Adrian, you need to see this." She handed me her phone, showing a news article from TechCrunch with the headline, "Blake Innovations raises $50 million in series of funding plans national expansion of Phoenix initiative." $50 million. The number was almost abstract at this point, but what it represented was very real. The resources to help hundreds of betrayed innovators turn their pain into power. Julian Cross materialized from the crowd, looking every inch the billionaire kingmaker in his perfectly tailored suit. "Adrian, congratulations. You've built something truly special here." "We've built something special," I corrected. "None of this happens without the team." "True," he said, raising his champagne glass. "But it took someone with your particular combination of brilliance and righteous anger to make it happen. Most people who get betrayed stay bitter. You turn bitter into better." As the evening wounded down and the last guests filtered out into the Denver night, I stood alone in the museum's main hall, surrounded by the detritus of a successful launch party. Empty champagne glasses, scattered business cards, and the lingering energy of people who just witnessed something important being born. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the news coverage. "Congrats on your success. See, Charles, even from federal prison, the bastard was still trying to worm his way back into my life." I deleted the message without responding. Some bridges weren't worth rebuilding. They were better left as charred ruins that reminded you why you burned them in the first place. I walked to the windows overlooking the city, looking out at the Denver skyline that had watched my entire transformation from betrayed husband to business mogul. Somewhere out there, Melissa was probably in her federal prison cell, wondering how the man she dismissed as a pathetic loser had ended up on magazine covers while she counted down the days until parole. But I wasn't thinking about her or Charles or any of the people who tried to break me. I was thinking about Jennifer Walsh and the dozen other innovators we were about to find. I was thinking about the 100 more applications sitting in our inbox. I was thinking about a future where betrayal wasn't the end of someone's story. It was just the beginning of their revenge arc. As I headed for the exit, I passed a mirror in the museum lobby and caught a glimpse of myself. Same face, same basic features, but everything else had changed. The man looking back at me wasn't the naive husband who trusted blindly and loved unconditionally. This was someone harder, smarter, infinitely more dangerous to his enemies, and infinitely more valuable to his allies. I am Adrian Blake. I am free. I am enough, and I will never be erased again. The elevator doors closed, carrying me toward whatever came next. And for the first time in my adult life, I was genuinely excited to find out what that would be.